Imagine waking up in a world where every aspect of your life is predetermined by strict rules. There is no margin for free choice, nor not even in the most intimate aspects of life. From the birth, you know that you will not be able to decide with who get married. You will have to follow rules unbreakable, and that any mistake could cost you life. This is not a fiction story. This was life in the ancient Israel. This was a world completely regulated by the Torah, the set of sacred laws that not only dictated, as I had to be practiced the religion, but also covered all aspects of daily life, from food to clothing, from family relationships to the judicial system. In Israel, the faith was not just a belief, but the basis on which was built all the society. One of the beginning fundamental aspects of this society were the strict role modeling between men and women. Women were not seen as individuals with right to decide about one's life, but as part of the family patrimony. First, they belonged to their parents, then to their husbands. Marriage was not a matter of love, but a social and economic contract that guaranteed the stability between families. The girls could be delivered in marriage to the 12 or 13 years old, and from that moment on, his destiny was sealed. They couldn't refuse. They couldn't divorce by decision own. They could not testify against a man in a trial, and if they were accused of adultery, the punishment could be public stoning. But Israel was not only governed by its own laws. It was also a people who lived under constant threat. Located in a strategic region, it was a territory coveted by the great empires of the time: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and later Rome. Wars, invasions, and high taxes were part of daily life. People lived among the faith and the constant fear of being subjugated by a power foreigner. What was he like, day by day, in this society where the religion it ruled everything? What meant live in a world where the justice depended on sacred interpretations, and the women did not have right to say no? Come with me in this journey to the past, where we will explore the secrets of a civilization that, despite having existed long ago, thousands of years, continues to mark our history. Ancient Israel was not just a territory, but a society built on an unshakable foundation: the faith in one God. Unlike the empire's neighbors, who worshipped multiple divinities, the Israelites lived under the principle absolute of monotheism, Yahweh. It was not only the center of his religion, but the figure that determined the fate of the town. His willpower was embodied in the Torah, a sacred code that regulated morality, the justice, the economy, and even the private life of each individual. It was not just a matter of faith, but of a system of absolute control, where everything was predetermined by divine commandments. Disobedience did not only mean breaking the law, religion, it was to challenge the order, same as the existence. The rules not only established what was right or wrong, but also the punishments for those who strayed of the path. To comply with these laws, Israel counted with a judicial system where the judges were seen as wise and respected. However, it was not enough with accusing someone. For a conviction to be valid, it was required the testimony of at least 2 or 3 witnesses. Even thus, the punishments were severe, especially when it came to crimes that attacked the faith. Idolatry, the adultery, and the blasphemy could punish oneself with the death. It was believed that the well-being of the entire community depended on the religious purity of its members. So the law not only protected the innocent, but eliminated the guilty without concession. Within this social structure, the men had privileges that the women could not even imagine. Since they were little, they studied the Torah and could aspire to occupy important positions in the community, already were as judges, scribes, or priests. The women, on the other hand, did not have right to participate in religious debates or to serve as witnesses in a trial. His function was limited to the home, and its education was focused in being obedient wives and mothers. Although the law ordered that they be protected, This protection only existed in as long as they remained within the role expected of them. In this deeply religious society, power was concentrated in two figures, fundamental: the priests and the prophets. The first, descendants of the tribe of Levi, were the responsible for maintaining the temple and perform sacrifices in name of the town. Everything related to ritual purity passed through his hands, and his authority was unquestionable. Prophets, on the other hand, were seen as messengers of God. They were said to have the ability to speak with Yahweh and warn Israel when people moved away of the path correct. They were feared and respected because their words could bring with them warnings of destruction or promises of redemption. Religion was not a simple belief in the ancient Israel. It was the structure same that defined life, the justice and the destiny of each person. To obey meant protection and stability. Challenge the law could cost life. From the birth, the life of a woman in the ancient Israel was marked by one certainty: it would never be owner of her own destiny. In a society where the authority was masculine, his existence was determined by the will of her father first and then of her husband. She had no right to choose with whom marry nor to reject a commitment. He could not present his testimony in a judgment nor aspire to a religious education like the men. Their role was limited to the home, where they had to achieve with her duties as wife and mother without questions. Marriage was not seen as a union based in love, but as an agreement between families. The woman was given to her husband at 12 or 13 years, an age in the one that barely left behind childhood. From that moment on, he was under the total authority of the husband, who had right to make decisions about your life, your body, and even its fate in case of widowhood or divorce. While the man, he could repudiate his wife if he found in she something indecent, the woman did not have the right to request a divorce account. Fidelity was an absolute duty for the woman, and anyone's suspicion of adultery could become in a death sentence. If charged, she was to face a trial where his word had less value than that of the men. In more extreme cases, she could be taken before the priests to undergo a ritual test. She had to drink a bitter mixture that, according to the belief, would reveal his guilt if your body reacted adversely. If she survived, she was declared innocent. If she fell ill, she was considered guilty and severely punished. But the submission was not only required in marriage. Since childhood, the girls, they learned that their value depended on the obedience. They are not allowed to study the Torah as the children, nor participate in religious debates. Their world was limited to the home, where their main function was to ensure the offspring of the family and maintain the purity of the lineage. If a woman was left widow without children, I had to marry with a brother of his deceased husband to ensure the family continuity. Your will was not taken into account. Even in the more everyday issues, women lived under strict rules. During their menstrual period, they were considered impure and had to stay away from certain religious activities. They could not touch sacred objects or enter the Temple of Jerusalem in that state. His access to the spirituality was always mediated by the male figure, already out her father, her husband, or the priests. Despite these restrictions, some women managed to stand out in the history of Israel. Figures like Deborah, a prophetess and judge, broke with the norms of the time and came to lead the people in times of war. Others, like Jael and Ruth, defied the expectations imposed on their gender and left his fingerprint in the tradition Hebrew. However, these cases were exceptional and did not represent the reality of the most. Being a woman in the ancient Israel meant live without right to say no. From the moment you were born until the day of his death, his life was governed by the will of the men and women's sacred laws. Society does not consider a person with autonomy, but part of the family patrimony, a possession whose value depended on its obedience and purity. In the ancient Israel, the justice was not a human affair, but divine. There was no separation between the law and the religion, since both came from the same source, the Torah. What we would consider today civil or criminal norms, in that society were sacred commandments that should be fulfilled without questions. Disobedience did not only mean challenging the social order, but also betray God. Therefore, the penalties were severe and, in many cases, irreversible. The judicial system was based in the authority of the elders and priests, who they interpreted the laws and dictated the sentences. Not just any could be condemned without evidence. The Torah established that to validate a serious accusation, there must be at least 2 or 3 witnesses. However, this did not guarantee fair trials, since the value of the testimony depended on the social position of the accused and the victim. The women, the slaves and the foreigners had less credibility than a free Israelite man, which inclined the balance of the justice in favor of the powerful. Some crimes were considered especially serious and did not have margin of negotiation. Idolatry, that is, worshipping others' gods, was seen as a betrayal unforgivable. Who were discovered practicing cults other than Yahweh could be executed. Adultery was also punished with the death, but unevenly. While the unfaithful woman was severely punished, man could get away with it depending on the circumstances. Even the filial disobedience could be grounds for extreme condemnation. If a son was considered rebellious and defiant, his own parents could bring it before the elders of the city to be stoned to death. The punishment was not always physical. In many cases, the social exclusion was a devastating punishment. Lepers, for example, were not executed, but they had to live isolated from the community. The impure, that is, those who broke certain religious rules, they could be removed from the temple and from public life until they complied a purification process. This marginalization, although it did not imply the death, meant a condemnation to misery and abandonment. The executions were carried out in public to serve as a warning. Stoning was the most common method, but not the only one. Some punishments included the bonfire, the decapitation or the strangulation, depending on the type of crime. The severity of the penalties had a clear purpose: to instill the fear necessary so that no one dare to challenge the God's will. Justice, in Israel, it was not only punished the individual behavior, but also sought to preserve the purity of the people. Every sentence, every punishment, every execution had a greater purpose: to maintain the fidelity to the divine law and ensure that the people of Yahweh remain holy and separate from the customs of others' nations. Israel was not only a town with laws strict, but also a challenging land. Its geography, it was marked by a dry climate, lands rocky, and a dependency almost absolute of the rains. Survival was not easy. The harvests could be lost with a prolonged drought, and the water was a resource as valuable as gold. To ensure the agricultural production, the Israelites developed sophisticated irrigation systems, such as terraces in the slopes of the mountains and cisterns for storage water in times of scarcity. Despite the difficulties, the Israeli economy prospered thanks to agriculture and trade. The main crops were wheat, the barley, the vine, and the olive tree. Olive oil and cane were products in high demand, both inside and outside Israel. The merchant caravans, they brought spices, textiles, and precious metals from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Phoenicia, exchanging them for agricultural products and handicrafts locals. However, the prosperity was not within everyone's reach. The people was loading with the weight of the taxes, which were levied by both local authorities and the dominant empires. During the domain of the Babylonians, Persians, and later the Romans, tax burdens became oppressive. Tributes were demanded in the form of agricultural products, livestock, or coins, forcing many peasants to go into debt and, in extreme cases, sell their land or even themselves as slaves. Despite these inequalities, the Mosaic Law established mechanisms to avoid the accumulation of excessive wealth. Every 50 years, the year of the Jubilee ordered the liberation of slaves and the return of land to its owners' originals, preventing the families will be permanently trapped in poverty. This system attempted to keep social balance and remember that the land did not really belong to the men, but to God. In this fragile balance between the abundance and the shortage, The geography and the economy defined daily life as well as religion. Survive in Israel, it did not only depend of the human effort, but also of the divine will, since a single drought could change the destiny of an entire generation. The history of Israel is the story of a town in constant struggle. His geographical location, in a crossroads of the most important trade routes of the ancient world, the converted in a territory coveted by powerful empires. Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks and Romans, all of them they saw on this small strip of land a key strategic point. For the Israelites, each generation seemed destined to face the weight of war and oppression foreigner. But the conflicts did not only come from the outside. Within their own borders, the people of Israel also suffered internal divisions. The tribes often rivaled each other, and disputes over power led to the separation of the kingdom into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This division weakened the nation and made it more vulnerable to invasions foreigners. Wars were not only battles for territory, but also conflicts spiritual. It was believed that defeats were not simply the result of the military force of the enemy, but a divine punishment for the disobedience of the people to Yahweh. When Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and took the Israelites into exile, it was not seen as a simple conquest, but as the consequence of having departed from the sacred law. In among these time dark, the prophets played a crucial role. They were the voices warning the people about the consequences of their sins and called for the conversion before disaster struck. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel spoke not only of war, but of hope, promising that a day Israel would be restored. However, peace was never lasting. Century after century, Israel went from a domain to another until it finally came under the control of the Roman Empire. In this new stage, the oppression reached unbearable levels, and the Jews they began to dream with a liberator who would guide them towards the independence. Some they expected a military leader, others a Messiah sent by God. But war, struggle and endurance would continue marking the history of this town for generations. Although the religion dominated life in Israel, culture and celebrations offered moments of joy and rest from the strict daily rules. Religious festivals were not only acts of devotion, but also opportunities to gather in community, sharing meals, singing and dancing. Among the most important were the Easter, which commemorated the liberation from Egypt, the Shavuot, which marked the giving of the Torah, and the Feast of Tabernacles, in the one that the families lived in cabins temporary in memory of your crossing the desert. Music and the dance were expressions fundamentals of the people of Israel. They were used not only in celebrations, but also in times of mourning and prayer. The Psalms, attributed to King David, were recited or sung in the temple, accompanied by instruments such as lyres, cymbals, and flutes. Dance, on the other hand, was a manifestation of joy collective and could be seen in weddings, military victories, and religious rituals. The theatre, as it is we know today, was not part of the Israelite culture, since the society rejected the influences of the civilization's pagans. However, the narratives oral, they had a crucial role. The elders and teachers transmitted stories and teachings through parables and epic tales, many of which were registered in the sacred texts. The entertainment. It also included games and sports. Although were not practice competitions organized as in Greece, the children they played with stones, bones and boards, rudimentary strategy. Men, youths, they trained in combat and archery, essential skills for the defense of the nation. Despite living in a society of strict rules, the people of Israel found ways to enjoy life. The festivities, the music, and the storytelling allowed a respite in the middle of a world ruled by the faith, war, and justice relentless. Health in the ancient Israel was deeply linked to the religion. Illness was not seen only as a physical problem, but also as a spiritual consequence. It was believed that many ailments were divine punishments for sin, and therefore healing did not depend only on remedies natural, but also of ritual purity and intervention of the priests. The temple had a crucial role in the public health. Who suffered diseases considered impure, such as leprosy, should be treated present themselves before the priests, who determined whether they could remain in the community or whether they should be isolated. Impurity meant not only the danger of contagion, but also a separation from the presence of God. Despite the strong religious influence, there were medical knowledge based in the observation and use of remedies natural. Olive oil, honey, and certain herbs were used to treat wounds and infections. The baths in the Dead Sea were valued for their healing properties, and personal hygiene was strictly regulated by the Mosaic law. However, Israelite medicine was not so advanced like that of Egypt or Mesopotamia. The doctors were few, and in many cases the diseases were treated with prayers and rituals instead of scientific interventions. The treatments combined empirical knowledge with faith in a balance where the physical well-being depended as much on the body as well as soul. In Israel, the science and the religion were not separate. Healing was seen as a divine process, and the true health could only be achieved through the obedience to the laws of God. The constructions in the ancient Israel not only reflected the need for shelter, but also the deep connection of the town with his faith. The most important building was, without a doubt, the Temple of Jerusalem, considered the dwelling place of God in the earth. The structure was imposing, with enormous columns, sacred courtyards, and a sancta sanctorum, where only the high priest could enter once a year. This temple was not only a place of worship, but also the political and economic center of the nation. To survive in an arid land, the Israelites developed innovations in the management of the water. One of the most impressive examples was the Hezekiah Tunnel, a 533-meter-long engineering work that secured the water supply to Jerusalem in times of war. Cisterns and aqueducts were also built that allowed store rainwater for times of drought. The housing was simple, built with stone and mud. In the cities, houses used to have a single floor with flat roofs where the families were sleeping in the nights hot. The richest could afford houses with several rooms and internal courtyards, while the poor lived in modest, single-room structures. Despite its limitations, Israel managed to create resilient buildings and efficient systems to cope with their hostile environment. Every stone, every tunnel, and every temple reflected not only the need for protection and survival, but also the deep devotion of a town whose architecture was designed to honor their God. Ancient Israel was much more than a kingdom governed by religious laws. It was a society where life was determined by rules unbreakable, where the faith dictated every aspect of the existence, and where the justice could be ruthless. From the absolute submission of the women to severe punishments for those who challenged the Torah, every citizen lived under the shadow of rules that could not be questioned. However, within this rigid structure also existed resilience. Despite wars, the taxes, and the oppression, the people of Israel managed to preserve their identity and traditions throughout the centuries. His ability to adapt to the adversity, his devotion and sense of community them allowed to resist even under the domain of the most powerful empires of the history. Many of the practices and beliefs of ancient Israel, they have left fingerprint in the modern world. The influence of its legal code and religious principles still resonate in the traditions of millions of people. His legacy has transcended time, becoming in the basis of great civilizations and belief systems. But maybe the most shocking thing about this story is the way in which the Israelite society saw life as a constant test of obedience and faith. For them, every law, every punishment, and every celebration were not simple customs, but the divine will in action. And although the world has changed, the questions that were raised are still valid. Until what spot the rules they can govern a society without oppressing its members? Where ends the faith and begins control? Now it's your turn to reflect. What you think about the way they lived in the ancient Israel, leave it in the comments and let's continue exploring together mysteries of the history.